if that's the case, and you can see that, like I said, good reporter, you do your research and all this stuff. Why is it that it seems like it's so easy to placate progressives into not ever criticizing Joe Biden, because he could potentially do these very progressive things, which by the way, doesn't even have legislation for. He just has a paragraph for. That's where it feels like there's something going on there that it just does not make sense for something like the infrastructure package to be coming up. And, there's certain things that progressives wanted, like, let's talk about expanding Medicare, right? Progressives want Joe Biden to expand Medicare. Joe Biden, his corporate donors and corporate Democrats want him to just throw more money to ACA subsidies. But they're not going to actually push back on that in a real and effective way, because they're sitting there like, oh, well, he could do these great things maybe in the future. Maybe he doesn't have legislation for it. He has a paragraph for it. So we're not actually going to say anything bad about him or criticize the administration. What we're going to go out there and say is, oh, he's exceeding our expectations. He's doing such a great job. A plus. Do you see that relationship the same way?
You are making the exact right point, a point that needs to be made, and a point that I've made privately. I'm working on some stuff around this very issue. You have to almost go back to the beginning of the Obama days. And Obama also came in with progressive praise, like this is a wonderful person, and look at this diversity, and we're such good people because we elected this person. And Obama was certainly not doing what a lot of progressives thought was the plan. And there were early steps in the administration in that term to not even criticize Obama, but criticize the Joe Manchins of their day, which were people like Ben Nelson, who was he was a former insurance CEO who became the senator from Nebraska. And surprisingly, he voted with the insurance companies a lot. So imagine that. So he I remember there was a situation where I think it was Move On did some ads in Ben Nelson's district saying, we need to get him on board for a public option or something. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I do remember that Rahm Emanuel immediately came out. He was the chief of staff to Obama at the time, and said, you guys are, I believe the word was fucking, I think is what he called Move On for doing that. And then they set up this little meeting called Common Purpose, which was a meeting with all the progressives where they would get access to the Obama administration and leaders within the administration. And they said, Move On, you're out of the meeting, right? And that was enough. And we used to call that, we had a word for this. We used to call this the veal pen. Like, you would keep these progressives locked up in the veal pen, and that would keep them in line. As long as you fed them a little bit in there and you gave them a little bit of access, then they would stay in line, right? Well, flash forward to the Biden years, you don't even need the pen.
Right.
The progressives are doing it to themselves. They don't need to be prodded. They're lining up lockstep by themselves. Which is fascinating. Like, there's no one stopping them.
They're getting talked to by their own party, which is in power. Isn't that enough to make you feel like they're involved? And there's so much, that we can do together just because they're talking to them, even though on the $15 minimum wage, and I want to ask you a question on this as well.
Okay.
And the public option. Nothing. Biden hasn't said pretty much. I mean, I guess he mentioned it in his speech yesterday, but
I think he mentioned both of them in the speech. But yes,
do you see fundamentally pathway forward for that, like outside of rhetoric?
Right. I mean, let me just start with I think it's a combination of access, of post-traumatic stress disorder from Trump, because the first thing you hear if you criticize Biden is, "What do you want, Trump again?" Right. So, like, that's ever present. This idea of Trump, and then part of it is just being bad at politics. I mean, I think a lot of progressive groups are really bad at politics, and they do things like praising Biden and then saying, "Oh, I hope that you pass this legislation to lower drug prices.
They've said that so many times.
Ask for the drug prices first before you do the praise, right? Like, don't be cheap dates. So yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting on a huge problem. Now, as for public option, I think that goes part and parcel with healthcare legislation generally. We had a piece on this today from John Walker, who's a great guy, a great writer at our website, about how Biden literally is creating new welfare systems within this family's plan in terms of like new universal pre-K and new community college. He'd rather do that than harm the profits of the hospital and drug industries by like $1, right? Like he just doesn't want to arouse any kind of industry backlash. Most of the things, I mean, there are a lot of very good things, depending on how they're done. There are a lot of very good things in the family's plan, the jobs plan, but none of them really confront, corporate power. They don't. I mean, none of them really do that. And so it's been very, and healthcare is very much part of that. Now for as far as minimum wage goes, as I mentioned, he did this thing on federal contractors, which is good because that's what he can do. And then he mentioned it in the speech. There are some bipartisan talks going on that I think are centered around $11 an hour as the target. This is Manchin, Sinema, Romney. They're all looking at these numbers. I mean, if you do that, first of all, let's get straight on what the minimum wage thing is, right? $15 an hour wasn't for 5 years, right? The way it was ramped up in the bill, it wouldn't have hit 15 for 5 years. If you do $11 in 2 years, you're almost at the level of that ramp up, right? Because the way it was going. So $11 in 2 years, then you index it to inflation and you automatically trigger increases in the minimum wage as inflation gets higher. It's not good, but it's not terrible because it's kind of the same place you would be in 2 years. And then it would go down. The truth is we really need an increase in the minimum wage. We haven't had one since 2007. It's at its lowest level of purchasing power at $7.25 an hour in history, since they invented the minimum wage in 1938. So something really does need to get done. But once again, you go back to the progressive urgency, and it's not really there. You would think if this was such a priority, it would be something that would be incessantly talked about. You need to get this done. This is key to your political fortunes, and we just don't see that.
No, it's not there. It's not there. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer for anyone, but that urgency is not there. If that urgency was there, they would have got concessions with Force the Vote back in January. They got no concessions. In fact, they lost their committee seats. They lost certain committee seats. A narrow PAYGO waiver, that's literally regressive. Like, that's regressive. Before Nancy Pelosi was in there, PAYGO wasn't there. Now that she's in there, we're going to get narrow exemptions. That's not a step forward. Can we start understanding that like things are relative? You know what I mean? Like, and that's what's frustrating about me. If they really had urgency, they would have done something to get the $15 minimum wage into that first reconciliation bill. It's not in there. It's probably not going to be in this one. The same arbitrary or random hurdles were present.
I mean, even if you think that, okay, the parliamentarian has spoken, so we can't do anything if the parliamentarian says so. They obviously run the world. Even if you think that, the minimum wage increase is super popular. If you go back to like the 1990s, the minimum wage has been on state ballots 23 times. It's 23-0.
Wow.
It's never lost since like the 80s.
You're telling me poor people don't go out there and vote against giving themselves a raise.
And this is, by the way, this is not. I'm not tipping the. I'm not putting my thumb on the scale. It's not just New York and California or something. This is in South Dakota. Mm-hmm. This is in Arkansas. This is in Nebraska. This is in deep red states. The minimum wage always passes. So if you were a party that really, really wanted to get this done, why not put it on the floor? Let's dare Republicans to stop it. It's a super popular policy. Now, maybe they do stop it. And if they do stop it, then use that.
Right.
This senator voted to not give you a raise.
And there's the only problem with that is you have Democrats as well.
Right. Because you had 8 Democrats voted against. Yeah. You had 8 Democrats. Was it 8
David,
or 6?
It was 8. David, tell me, because I'm truly confused. We know that the Democrats essentially filibustered themselves because Chuck Schumer took it out of the reconciliation bill, meaning Bernie had to propose an amendment, meaning the Republicans could have a motion against proceeding or whatever, meaning it needs 60 votes, which you're never going to get.
Right.
Why on earth, Dave, would those Democrats not just vote for it?
Right.
Why even have the spectacle where, Kyrsten Sinema's voting it down, all this other shit? Why even do that?
Right, because what you're saying is it would not have passed anyway.
It's not going to pass anyway.
So why put yourself on the record? And a lot of it is sometimes it's not just the money you take. It's the money you fear will be used against you later. So I mean, this is something, I mean, Ryan Grimm has talked about this a lot. If you vote for this minimum wage, it's not that you won't get money from the National Retail Federation or National Restaurant Association or something. It's that you fear that they'll run a super PAC campaign against you in your next election. And so that's the way that these people think. Now, what are they going to say? I mean, they're not going to. I mean, the funny thing is that bill or that super PAC campaign won't be about the minimum wage. It won't be about the minimum wage at all. They'll find some other bullshit kind of thing to knock that particular member of Congress. But it begs the question of what are you doing there? Like, what are you there to do if not to improve the lives of people? Are you just there to collect a paycheck? I mean, so that's where I land with it.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, this is obviously not fact. This is a hypothesis on my part, but I think that they do things like this to spread out the attention. Well, it's not just Chuck Schumer. It's not just Biden. It's not just the parliamentarian. Oh, well, What do you mean? There's 8 other Democrats who you have to get to sign on. So we're not actually going to fight. Like, it seems like it spreads out the, the blame a little bit. No one person gets the most.
There was an old, I think it was Glenn Greenwald wrote this, and it was called the situation of the rotating villain, right? So what would happen is they wouldn't pick the same person, Democrats, to vote down the bill every time. So you couldn't focus your attention on Joe Lieberman or whoever. Sometimes it'd be Joe Lieberman. Sometimes it'd be Dianne Feinstein. Sometimes it's a rotating cast of villains so that sometimes they do right by you and you're like, well, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. Yeah. But there's always one. Right. There's always one. So you spread the wealth. You spread it out to everybody. Yeah.
No, that's. I mean, I think that's spot on. I didn't know that he actually had said that. So I mean, I guess
that's an old blog post from like the salon days or something. Yeah. I'm too old. I know way too many stupid things. So.